Meow and welcome to Banned Books Conversations, where radical readers discuss prohibited prose. I'm your host, Tonya Todd, and we're here to talk about banned books, literary works that have been removed from a library shelf or school curriculum. Over the course of Banned Books Week, this series will cover 7 different books, the reasons they were banned, and the value in reading them. And today's book is Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. I should warn you, there will be spoilers ahead, but before we get to that, let's meet today's radical readers. And we will start with Dr. Wendy Wimmer. Please tell us a bit about who you are and what you do.
Hello, listeners. I'm so excited to be back for Banned Books Week. So thank you so much for having me. I am an author and an editor out of Wisconsin. Don't hold it against me, but we're turning the state blue one person at a time. And my book, Entry Level Stories, was the 2021 Fiction Award winner for Autumn House Press, and it was one of Kirkus Review's 100 top notable books of the year. And I am a huge fan of Ishiguro. He's one of my favorite authors, and just astoundingly good. So I'm just professing my bias right away that I'm going to be the stan, I think, on this call.
Kat?
Hi, I'm Kat Fieler. I run under KJ Fieler. My debut novel, Shadowrunner, is a young adult, and it really does hit the topics of marriage and freedom for women. And I was kind of hoping to change Netflix and all the other conversations about the Victorian era, and it wasn't really a nice place, to be if you were a woman. And the next book is hitting on the same topics. I'm a resident of Florida currently, but not really. I'm a resident of the United States, quite literally. My husband and I travel the country in an Airstream, and we're most often in national parks.
And Brandon?
Hi, excited to be back. Thank you for having me again, Tonya. I'm Brandon Mead, and I primarily write short fiction about queer characters. I've worked for publishers. I have been a bookseller. I'm an open mic host, and I'm also the author of trans-inclusive gay erotica under a semi-secret pen name, Leo Sparks. And I am also from Florida, so this hit home for me.
Yeah. So, Kat, this is your first year joining us for this series. What is it about the Banned Books conversation that interests you?
There are a couple of things. I think that as an author, and I'm sure everybody here agrees with that it makes it difficult for authors to make a living if we start censoring books. I think that as adults, we can make decisions, and I think the American Association of Librarians makes those decisions very well, and I don't think there's any cause for interference. I think that, I'm trying to think of his name, but Captain Underpants, the author that wrote that, said it best. Instead of saying, I don't think children should read this book, let's say, I don't think my children should read this book. And I think that should be the conversation. And as adults, I don't like banning books for another reason, of freedom of creative expression. I mean, at one point, Amazon even took Mein Kampf out of its catalog, and there was a huge pushback on that, even from people who thought it was a horrible book. It's a matter of censorship, and it's just not something in America that I think it's a reasonable thing for us to accept.
And Brandon, you're a returning guest. What interests you in this conversation?
I'm old enough to remember when I couldn't find myself in a book, in a bookstore, where it was kind of, you had to secretly sort of thumb through every single thing and look for some sort of keyword of like, oh, this resonates with me. And I think a lot of that wasn't that the gay stories or the queer stories didn't exist. They very much existed. And whether they were published or not, they were still like not being put into bookstores and libraries in Florida. So I'm in small town Florida trying to find, answers or someone like me. And it was not an easy task. And I think we've gotten to a point where it's a little bit easier, and I don't want to see us go back ever. So I think it's a matter of not banning books for the sake of hoping people can find themselves in the pages. I mean, that's why we're writing books, is to hope that it resonates with somebody. And even if that means that there are topics that maybe we feel like shouldn't be, put out there or distributed. People are just sort of looking for answers out there. So we have to do our best to hope that everybody can find themselves.
And Wendy, another returning guest.
Well, I am a big proponent in word, act, thought, and deed of making sure to have a well-read and diverse spectrum of media that I'm bringing into my brain and recommending to folks. So much like what Kat was saying about making sure that, creative expression you have out there, and what Brandon was stating about, representation and the importance of that, all of those things are a yes. Are is there are there books that are potentially detrimental? Yes, probably. Should we, limit or make that decision for everybody? Absolutely not. I mean, making sure that people are aware of what they're picking up and reading is, I'm all for that, but actually restricting it and keeping it out of um especially something as you know I guess literally beautiful as Never Let Me Go, and keeping it out of a school because of some of the feelings that it gives you about, and opening up your eyes about some of the ethical questions it brings up. That's exactly the reason why we read. We read to be able to understand, and we read to be able to increase our empathy and and live life inside the skin of these characters, and therefore understand more of what it's like to be a human other than us, or I suppose anything else, any non-human character as well. A rabbit in Richard Adams' Watership Down, for instance. So finding that is a little bit of touching into your own humanity, even if you decide, what I am thinking about, like Nabokov's Lolita, another very banned book, but still a brilliant work of fiction. I can make a decision of, I can see how easily that slippery slope is, that Humbert, believes himself the hero of his story, and I am not that person. So those are the kind of conversations that readers can have with themselves through the portal of a challenging book, or a challenged book for that matter.
So Wendy and Brandon, you've answered some of these questions in previous episodes, but it's worth revisiting the topics for those who didn't catch those discussions, or in case maybe your answer has changed. So we'll start with you for this one, Brandon. Have you experienced a book that offended you? And if so, how did you respond to that offense?
Working in a bookstore, you get asked for the wide range of the spectrum. So I was going to have customers, even living in the Pacific Northwest now, toward, very close to Seattle. I would still have customers coming in asking for specifically anti-trans titles, specifically far-right conspiracy books that I knew were just full of misinformation. But we did carry them because we believed in not banning anything. We believed in the freedom of information. And so, I was confronted with those titles and that information and the people that wanted that information every single day I was there. So I had to kind of get in this space where it was like, okay, it's here, it's available. They want it. What can I do to maybe make them aware they are interacting with a queer person who's going to hand this title over to them, but may also say, have you ever looked on YouTube and watched a trans person speak about transition? Have you ever considered this? So, in the nicest way possible, of course, but using that opportunity to have an interaction with them, and maybe give them some resources, and hope that even if they bought the title, that maybe they walked away with something else.
How about you, Wendy?
It's such a deep question. Yes, I have. So I used to coordinate a book and author festival, and we, Green Bay, Wisconsin, kind of a very purple leaning, probably a little red county. And there was some criticism, especially from sponsors, like, are you going a little too liberal? We had Margaret Atwood, we had Roxane Gay come in, we had Denez Smith. And one of the sponsors really was pressing, and again, this was 2017. So, but they wanted to have and bring in JD Vance because they wanted to get closer to JD Vance. They had met them. They wanted to develop the relationship. So I read Hillbilly Elegy, and I was like, you know what, this is kind of, I don't feel good about this. I don't understand why you're pushing so hard for this one individual. So we ended up bringing in a different conservative author because we were like, okay, point taken. Maybe we're not representing all viewpoints of our audience, And we'll bring in somebody who's outspokenly conservative, but not necessarily pursuing something that makes me feel gross. So I respect other people's point of views, but I don't want to feel gross about it. So like Brandon, I applaud you that you were able to hand over those books and not throw it at them. But I think I was basically like, you know what, I'm a volunteer. You're not paying me to put on this book festival. You don't get to use my book festival to pursue an agenda that I feel negatively against. So was I maybe part of the problem the reverse way of banning? I wasn't banning those books. They were welcome to be sold in the in the book fair, but I wasn't going to give that person airtime based off of what I felt was kind of icky. It made me feel icky. I didn't want to do anything. I was making it was supposed to be fun for me to put on the book festival, you know, because I wasn't getting paid. So I was like, you know, if it makes me feel icky, I'm just going to say no.
And
Yeah,
there's a difference between banning and simply not advocating for something.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
And a paycheck helps when you know, to stop you from giving your full opinion, in my experience.
Also accurate. And that's kind of what I said. They were like, well, wait, you know, how come, you know, I'm donating whatever money. And I'm like, yes, that's right. You're donating that money for us to put on this book festival. We have listened to a lot of your suggestions. We have made sure that you had access to areas, you know, in courtesy of your support, but that doesn't mean that you get to tell us what to do. So and they actually ended up being fine with it. They were thrilled with our other conservative author, who was Charlie Sykes, by the way, if anybody's curious. But now I have to say I feel very vindicated that I was like, no, hillbilly elegy, it makes me feel gross. And now I'm like, past me, I knew.
Past me. How about you, Kat?
Actually, yes. And I'm going to point out a book that's not really controversial, or it's just a story, really. But in college, I was forced to read Flannery O'Connor, and I don't like any of her stories. In particular, A Good Man is Hard to Find. And it was a very difficult assignment for me. I understood what we were trying to do there, but because of an incident in my past, it was very triggering. And so it was a really difficult time for me. And I had to talk to the teacher, and she put me in touch with a counselor that was free. But even though it was triggering for me, it actually started a discussion that put me on a path to address a previous trauma. So I think even in mainstream literature, required literature, especially college literature, there are an awful lot of things that are going to bother you for one reason or another. And that doesn't mean they should be banned. I mean, certainly not something that I hope that my daughter has to read, but it was something that it did change my way of thinking. And sometimes I've read things, and I won't be specific, but I've read things that I haven't agreed with. But it's also expanded my way of thinking, and it at least gives me the opportunity to think, well, I've never been there, so I don't know what this feels like. And I think that reading is a way of expanding empathy. You're getting a reaction or a thought or the way somebody else's life goes, and it's not yours. And if you don't read, then how else are you going to figure out what it's like to be someone else?
So you've already touched on this a little bit, Wendy, so we're going to start with you. Is there a scenario in which you feel banning a book is the correct course of action?
That's so hard, Tonya. Yes, but I haven't encountered it yet. And really, I should say, and I should caveat that with if we're talking a banned book, we're talking about saying a school curriculum cannot have it in the library. We're not saying it won't be in the public library. It would just not be in the school library. And there are certainly books and media that I would not feel comfortable as a non-parent, but as a taxpayer, I would not feel comfortable having it in the school library unmediated. You know, there's certainly a lot of X-rated material or things that would be, you know, basically exposing children to you know, kind of like X-rated stuff or triple X stuff. I think that wouldn't be okay. So, but should that be available? Should it be banned from being sold? We already know that some of that stuff is banned from being sold. Certainly child pornography is. So Are there books that should not be in school libraries? Absolutely. Most of them, something like A Never Let Me Go, like a Charlotte's Web, like those Tom Sawyer, Huck Finn, those books I don't think should be banned out of a school library. That said, I also think that having a reader's guide to understand and um, help explain some of the things that are happening in those books is essential. For instance, there's a lot of racism in Huckleberry Finn, but that's kind of the point that you're supposed to get. And I would not want people to think that it was actually encouraged. It's like I worry that young readers miss the point of that and think it's an invitation or a license to emulate some of those actions.
What about you,
Or-
Ken?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to add on, or cats, a good man is hard to find. I read that in high school, and it's problematic, and we did not get that context of it being problematic. And I would like to have that context. Like, let's read it, let's understand it. Let's read. I don't know if Lolita is necessarily ripe for, high school readers, but let's talk about what makes it really messed up.
Lolita is coming up a lot lately in conversation, and I'm thinking it might be a sign that it should be included on next year's list. We'll see.
Oh, I'm in for that one. I love Lolita. Not for the reasons everybody thinks, but I love it. Sorry, I interrupted you, Kat.
Oh, no, I totally agree with your point of view on this. Is there a book that I thought was appropriate to ban? No. I have yet to come up against my line on that. I think that having some sort of discussion about it is key. And also, there's some consideration about whether it's age appropriate, but the problem right now is this is being used as a political idea, not really protecting our kids. And I think that some of the books that I read in high school, gosh, I'm trying to think of some of them, but anyway, some of the books that I read in high school that were probably my parents would have been a little bit upset if they found out that I was reading it, Catch-22, for example. But we didn't just read it, we had a class discussion about it and what it meant. So I think that's really the key. And as an adult, there are things I really wish didn't exist in the world, but should they be banned? No, they appeal to someone. I don't know, say, wow, if you're reading that, I don't know. But that's also censorship, and I'm just really against censorship.
Brandon?
Yeah, I mean, I think my answer is the same as last year. Generally, no, I don't think any book should be banned. And I like what both Wendy and Kat were saying about, it's kind of, can we frame this into discussion if there's content that is challenging? Can we make sure that if we're reading this in a school or it's available in a school that they understand, have a reader's guide as like, this is why this is in here, this is what it's trying to say, and not using it as a license for something terrible. It also sort of, when I read that question initially, it made me think of My Secret Life, which is by an anonymous author. And that is not a book I stumbled upon in middle school in the school library. I stumbled upon that while I was looking for myself in a Barnes and Noble or a Borders or wherever I was, somewhere with an Italian soda. And it's a very graphic depiction of a man's entire sexual inventory. It's like the Canterbury Tales of Sex. It's huge. And it's like from day one, the first time to the last time, he repeats himself, he goes back over it. I held on to that book. I think I was in 7th grade when I discovered it, and it's graphic, but I held on to that book. Whereas I don't think I don't think it should have been available to me in a school setting, but it meant so much to me to find it because he was having experiences with men as well as women, and it felt very normalized to me when I read that. It also changed my perspective on sex long before I had it, because it made me think of sex as, oh, it's an adventure. Intimacy is an adventure. It's interesting. It's not scary. It's not. So do I think a typical 7th grader should have stumbled upon that book in their school library? No. Am I glad it was not banned for its content and I could find it at a Borders? Absolutely.
Well, generally, when we're talking book bans, we are talking specifically a school curriculum setting or a public library.
Gotcha.
We're not talking about bookstores.
I hope it was in the library. I don't know if it was in the public library. I should have looked.
Well, you said you held on to it, so I hope
I wouldn't have given it back.
Yeah.
I'd still be paying those library fines.
So, Brandon, how does the concept of the slippery slope fit in with the desire to ban books?
It's so dangerous, right? Because then we're talking about, okay, well, this book should be banned, but it's so subjective. So it's like, it just, if you ask, I think if you wanted to make sure you weren't offending anybody, if you asked enough people, you'd eventually just ban every book. And we don't want to live in a Ray Bradbury novel. Like, they're very good, but I don't want to live there. If I can pick my dystopia, it's not that one.
Right.
So I just feel like that's what happens. If you I could probably walk down the street and ask people to give me a list of the books that they would not like other people to read, and by the end of it, we just have no books left to read. Don't want that.
Now I'm very curious about which dystopian world you would
Oh,
choose to live, but do you have an answer?
gosh, if you have to pick, what's that Russian novel? That one's kind of interesting. And there's like, oh gosh, anything like that where you have like sort of like there's fun drugs involved and everyone's just building the same machine. Like, I don't know. That to me in like the institutionalized sort of way is interesting, not because I want the institutionalized part of it, but because I think it's an opportunity for rebellion and like the kind of rebellion you can really get away with in the shadows. So I feel like I want the dystopian world that is flawed because it would be the easiest to break through.
Hmm. So Wendy, slippery slope.
What about the slippery slope? It is a slippery slope.
How does the concept of the slippery slope fit in with book banning?
Well, I think that so I'm going to answer your question. I'm going to get there, but let me preface it with this. I think that most of the book banning is, of course, at various different levels of school, high school, middle school, grade school, etc. And it is up to us to trust the librarians who are making those decisions. What is essentially happening with a book banning isn't anybody deciding the book is wrong. It's a challenge of the school curriculum. And generally, as I think it was you, Tonya, or maybe you, Kat, who said it tends to be more of an ideological, political thing now. It's that and I was just reading in preparation for this talk, the Knight Foundation last week released a survey. It was on Publishers Weekly, that most people don't care about book banning. 78% of adults are confident that the public schools select the appropriate books for their students to read. And opposition to book banning is peak among liberals, Democrats, LGBTQ adults, while support for restricting students' access to books is highest among people who identify themselves as conservative because they are less confident in schools' handling of topics, including moral values, sexual and gender, religious beliefs, and political views. And they are particularly opposed to books that discuss topics as non-traditional gender identities and sexual orientation. So, with that in mind, the actual issue is not necessarily book banning itself. The slippery slope isn't around books. The slippery slope is, if they're going for the books, they're also going for the, having non-gendered bathrooms. They're also going for talking about critical race theory. They're also going for, I remember in my grade school history book, a line talking about how the Native Americans wanted to leave Wisconsin because they felt it was getting too crowded with all of the Caucasian immigration. So those are the kinds of things. That's what I think of when I think of a slippery slope with book banning. It's not so much like, well, they're going to ban, I don't know, Horton Hears a Who, which I think they did. But rather that if we continue to allow a very, very, very small minority of people to start being really loud and making these kinds of changes and challenging this level of curriculum that impacts everybody's kids, this is the slippery slope. And it's not just a slippery slope, it's a dangerous slope. Here there be dragons. So told you I'd get there, but that's where I'm coming down on that.
Kat.
I agree with Wendy a lot, and Brandon, well, both of them. But the thing that I question is who gets to make that decision. It bothers me a lot that this has become a political tool, and I don't want to go back 50 years. I mean, I think one of the things that's really great about public school is that the kids are in a situation where they're going to meet people that are different than them, that have different points of view, that have different lifestyles. I think that's a good thing. I think inclusivism is something that's American value to me. And so it's fine for you to decide that your child opts out of whatever the curriculum is, but it's something else to keep that thing, that idea from everyone, just because you have a smaller version of the world. So that really bothers me. It's a slippery slope in terms of who's making the decision and why.
And why? And that brings us to our next question. And I'm going to you, Wendy, because you've already touched on this a lot, that in recent years, there's been a pattern in the themes that get books banned. And what do you think that pattern says about where we are as a society?
Oh, I think it has to do with all of the everything that we're seeing on the news, everything that we're seeing in the current political elections that are happening, that there seems to be this desire to go back to something, and where that something is different depending on who you ask. They were saying the 50s. A lot of people have said the 50s, and whether that's the 1950s or the 1850s, depending on who you talk to. But really, I think it's about feeling a sense of the oppositional side losing something, losing a control, losing what they consider to be American values, maybe, or even like I don't know. It is, as Kat was saying, it's an imposition on everybody else, your own values. So I really like what Tim Walt said last week, I think it was, which is like, mind your own damn business. That's what America's values are. It's the freedom to have religion. It's the idea that, we are not actually a Christian. Everybody wants to talk about how American has Christian values, and America is not a Christian nation. It's ideologically opposed to the Constitution, in which we said, or the Declaration of Independence, where we had freedom of religion. So that is, I think, it's not. I really hope it's an extinction burst. Honestly, I hope it's the last dying gasp of the former kind of I don't want to say patriarchy, but just overriding zeitgeist of I don't know if it's the baby boomer generation. I don't want to get so pejorative about all these demographics, but just this last dying grasp of the Walter Cronkite era. Not that Walter Cronkite was a conservative; he's cool, but that's what I think is happening. I hope it's a last dying grasp and gasp of the make America whatever it was again, and it is them understanding that they are not the most important point of view anymore. And they never really were. They just were the presumptive rulers of the cultural zeitgeist, and now it turns out nobody cares. I'm still, and totally off topic, but I'm still mad that we did not get taco trucks on every corner. I believe I was promised that.
What are your thoughts on this, Kat?
I totally agree. I think it's a matter of
taco
control.
Trucks too?
Yeah, taco trucks for sure. Oh my God,
trucks for
yes.
all.
Yes, everywhere. No, I totally agree with Wendy. I am a boomer, so there's that.
Apologies.
No worries at all. No, because you have every right to point that out. But the fact is that I think that I don't identify with boomers generally, but I understand what you're saying, and I'm not offended. And the thing is that there are people in my circle who are a little bit afraid, and I needle them about this because fear. I remember my grandparents becoming like this. It happens when you get to a certain point and you start to lose control of your own life. It starts in retirement where you're nobody now. What do you do for a living? That's what people always ask when you go someplace. I don't do anything. I watch TV and play golf. So, so that becomes a problem for people at this age. But the other thing too is
sounds like that should be a brag.
No, not me. But the other thing too is I think it becomes difficult to stay up with society when you get older. I think that's another thing that we're seeing. It's not something that we're really talking about. The political climate, I think some of it is that. It's people who are now irrelevant and they want to be relevant again. They're no longer in control. And so it isn't last dying gasp. So I'm happy to say that my generation is dying out, and it'll be to you guys to lead. So I just think that it's a matter of control. It's people who just feel that they're losing control. And it's never okay for that to happen. It wasn't okay when I was young for my grandparents to tell me how long my skirt could be, or whether my brother could cut his hair or not, So it's just a new generation and a new problem. And I think that we're going to get past it.
Brandon.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing is that the themes always tend to be about identity, social justice, marginalized experiences, and giving them a platform. And it not only like reflects this societal discomfort that we have with talking about race and sexuality and like systemic inequality and things like that, but it's almost like directly saying we are afraid for people to be empathetic. We are afraid for these people that we're trying to control to learn about other stories and then develop empathy, because if they develop empathy, they're not going to vote against that person's interests. So I feel like that's what they're mining for, is anything in any content that could possibly teach these people that have not had these life experiences about that person's life and go, oh, wait a minute, you're a human too? Well, I hated you. I hated you just for who, I thought you were. And now I'm realizing life's kind of tough for you too. And maybe you're a person, and maybe I shouldn't be voting for your destruction. Maybe I shouldn't hate you. Maybe, so I think that's what they're mining for in a lot of these books that they're banning is, like Wendy mentioned Horton Hears a Who, like, hello, empathy, like, hello, caring about like other people that even if you aren't directly in their life. So I think that if something like that is being banned, it's because they want hardened people. They need more like, non-empathetic people on their side to keep voting against the interests of other humans. So that's the themes that I see.
Yeah, that's very powerful, Brandon. What is the value in reading books that might be considered offensive by some? And we'll start with Kat this time.
I think the value is empathy, critical thinking. I think that, okay, here's something from my life. We, when the kids were growing up, we deliberately had international students over the summer. And so they would stay with us for 8 weeks. And we would then go on vacation as a family, and we would travel to the different states. And not only did the kids learn about different states and cities and stuff, but they learned about how people from another country view our country. And so that was really important. And it was part of the learning experience. I mean, obviously we did it because, out of the goodness of our hearts, but we also did it as an education for our own children. And so now I see that as maybe one of the best things we ever did as parents, because our kids' home gatherings look like the UN. I mean, there's people from every walk of life, every sexual orientation, lots of, just different cultures, and a lot of their ideas are solidified around their early experiences. So I really think that it's important, especially in school, for us to expose the kids to different ways of being, different ways of thinking. That is the American experience, is inclusive and multicultural and everything in every other way, multi-everything. And so if we lose that, I think we're losing part of what makes this country one of the, I don't want to say special, but it's part of the American experience. And I think it's really important. It's one of the things that we have that we need to value.
You heard it here. Book bans are un-American.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on this, Brandon? The value of reading books that might be considered offensive?
I think, yeah, like Kat said, it's empathy. It's learning about somebody else's experience. I can think specifically, I was recently, she who should not be named, but I was speaking about J.K. Rowling and kind of trying to understand her perspective, which I obviously don't share and am not trying to excuse in any sort of way, but her opinions on trans people. And what I wanted to understand is how somebody arrives there, like especially after writing the kind of books that they've written. How do you arrive there? And so not that I wanted to read these things, but I've gone in and tried to understand like that turf perspective of like, how did we arrive here? And I do have empathy for these women that have had these terrible experiences and are maybe like equating trans women specifically with men incorrectly, but it's all coming from this place of fear of men and these terrible things that have happened. So I have empathy from, even though I completely do not agree with them, I have empathy for what they're going through, and just hope that they can also go the reverse way and try to gain some empathy reading materials they may consider controversial, to see the other person's perspective and arrive somewhere that kind of it's not a matter of logic, it's a matter of emotion, right? And so that's kind of what we're talking about. But unless you can get into that person's head a little bit more and kind of read their thoughts, it's not always the most fun thing to hear or to read, but I feel bad. Like when I'm angry, but I just feel bad for people that have arrived at this position because of fear. And I'm like, I'm sorry that happened to you, and that's really where I've ended up. And I feel like that's a better position to be in than I hate you. It's I don't agree with you, but I'm so sorry.
Yeah, that's beautiful. What are your thoughts, Wendy?
Well, first, Brandon's just been dropping truth bombs, and I've gotten chills like 3 times now. Like actual goosebumps.
I'm sitting here going, I am so grateful to know Brandon. And
Oh,
No,
it's
thank
like, I
you.
need to make sure that I tell him when we're done here. But
Oh,
saying it now, we're broadcasting it. I'm so grateful to know you because once again, you've expanded my mind. Just
oh,
the level of empathy you have for individuals that I might feel violence toward. Just
well,
it's touching, and you've impacted not just my life but my writing because of that. It's like, yes, I need characters like Brandon in my stories so that it's not just my vengeance.
sensitivity is both a blessing and a curse, and I am grateful for all of you as well.
See, I am sensitive and I get protective. Like, okay, well, what can I do to not hurt like this? And you find a way to make sure that those around you aren't hurting so that we can all feel safe. And I love that about you.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate
Sorry
that.
to segue. Wendy, please.
That's all right. I will be happy to hear the love bombing on Brandon all day long. Back to the question, though. I will just say this, and this is kind of a culmination of all of our kind of thoughts. That we're talking about empathy, and we're talking about, understanding people, but also book banning is a political act. And whenever we think about conservatives, one of the things they uphold so much is the founding fathers and the ideals of the American Revolution. That was spurned on by a banned book. Common Sense by Thomas Paine was banned by the governments, and it started a revolution. So there's a fantastic legacy of our forefathers for reading banned books.
Yeah, that needs to be mentioned more. Like that is the argument right there. And I bless you for bringing that up, Wendy. Just thank you for that. I want to stick with you here because book bans are only one of the many freedoms that are under attack in our country right now. So why is it important that we continue this particular fight?
Oh God, that's such a loaded question, Todd. Why? Because the moment we stop fighting, we lose everything. We have to fight. Just you can't make it easy. At the end of the day, we might not be able to affect change, and I actually don't believe that. I think we will affect change, just as the cranky super conservative grandma who's fighting to get books banned in every kind of little curriculum out there down in Florida or wherever, is affecting change by being loud and writing a lot of letters and calling senators every day. Just as they're affecting change, we can affect change just as well. We can, quote Michelle Obama last week, do something. And by not doing something, that's how you know, the fascists win, right? If you roll over, every single little thing matters because it's all little things. It's all little things. So we can't give up. We have to we have to make sure that our rights aren't being trod upon, and our freedoms aren't being trod upon, whether that's bodily autonomy or the right to, you know, love who you love, or you know, the I don't know, the right to have visible tattoos at your job.
Hmm.
You got to fight.
Brandon.
I'm just really bad at memorizing things, so I don't want to have to memorize the books that we have left so I can retell them to people, like Fahrenheit 451.
Yes.
Like, I just don't want to live in a forest and have to like only know one book and recite that book to anybody who hasn't heard it before. Like, that just sounds like not so much fun. So just for my memorization skills, like we gotta like we just gotta make sure that we keep writing these books and that we have the freedom to keep writing these books and distributing these books and making sure they get in the right hands, you know, whether that's in a school library or not, depending on the content. And, you know, that's a whole other discussion. But, you know, I don't want my books in a school library. Please don't put them there. Please don't. You know, you know, like if there's a kid like me who's in 7th grade and goes in and finds some, you know, something like that, like that's on them. Like, because I had to do it. I did it once, but we're not going to put it in a library. I can tell them that. But yeah, just let's not memorize books. We got a lot we have to deal with up here.
Kat, why should we continue this particular fight?
Well, for one thing, otherism is never okay. So, and that's really what this comes down to right now. That's the tool being used. But the other thing too is, I lived through the 60s, and it wasn't until recently that I started understanding my own history. And I wonder if the generations after me understand, especially as a woman. So I don't understand, I did not understand until recently that I graduated high school in 1975. In 1974, I couldn't get a credit card without my father or a husband's signature. And I thought that I was going to college. And when I asked about that, my parents said, no, you're not going to college because that'll keep a man from having a job. So there's this whole putting people in a pigeonhole, whether you're a woman, whether you're gay, whether you're trans, whether you're Black, you know, or anything. I think that it's really important that the things that we, at least in my lifetime, we've been working towards acceptance, inclusivity, empathy, critical thinking. And I really hate to see us going back, because I have 2 granddaughters and they're going to inherit this world. And I hope that they don't become baby factories. I don't want them to become marital slaves. I don't want to see them have to look at who they want to marry or be around and be concerned about what is their sexual orientation or whether or not they're the same color. I don't want those things. We fought hard for those rights, and we've fought hard for the larger view, and I just don't want to see us going back.
Thank you for that. Well, I think we should talk about today's banned book. Published in 2005, Never Let Me Go is a devastating science fiction novel of innocence, knowledge, and loss. It was shortlisted for the 2005 Man Booker Prize, the 2006 Arthur C. Clarke Award, and the 2005 National Book Critics Circle Award. Time magazine named it the best novel of 2005, and in 2006, the novel received an ALA Alex Award. In 2019, The Guardian ranked it 4th on its list of 100 best books of the 21st century. And this year, 2024, the New York Times ranked it 7 on its best 100 books list. So, Wendy, you said you're a super fan. How did you first learn about this book, and what were the elements that attracted your attention?
I was I was in my master's program in creative writing fiction at UW-Milwaukee, and I was doing a independent study on unreliable narrators. So I was looking at different ways that narrators are unreliable, not just like the Lolita, you mentioned that earlier, where, you know, he's an unreliable narrator, but he isn't. He's also very earnest, and, you know, he's telling you all the truth. He's just swinging it in a way that you think it sounds totally normal. Kathy is an unreliable narrator, but yet she's telling you everything completely openly. She just assumes you know what the hell's going on. She assumes that you're in this world already. And so that's where I started it. And I had been aware of Ishiguro with Remains of the Day, and I thought that was beautiful. But I had never actually read Remains of the Day. I had just seen the movie, I believe. And just absolutely fell in love with the language and the way the story unfolds and how nonlinear it is. And at that point, I just was like, oh my God, I have to read everything. I have to read everything this man has ever written. So I've even read, like, his his memoir of music and everything, because he's a master. But what really drew me to it was, of course, it's a science fiction book without seeming like a science fiction book, or it's a dystopia without seeming like a dystopia, until you're like about 2/3 of the way in, you're like, holy shit, what is happening? And that's, I love that. What a magic trick. What a freaking magic trick that is.
Brandon.
Yeah, I so agree with that, Wendy, because my angle is like I'm a huge fan of the Twilight Zone. And so I feel like the Twilight Zone does the same thing where they kind of just like throw you straight in with no explanation. And then you're like slowly figuring out that like things are not quite right. And you're like, ah. So again, like that magic trick of like the reveal. So I'm a big fan of the Twilight Zone, Black Mirror, anything like anthology, speculative fiction, sci-fi that doesn't feel like sci-fi, like very much that. And so I remember watching Black Mirror and having an author friend of mine that was like, you have to read this book. And I was like, I remember hearing about this book. And so much of Black Mirror deals with like what it means to be human. And I think that's very much what we're dealing with, in Never Let Me Go. And so I was happy to finally have an opportunity to read the book. And I can see now why they were saying that Charlie Brooker, the creator of Black Mirror, definitely pulled a lot from this text and tried very hard to kind of anchor his short stories that he was telling into I mean, this is a long form narrative, but it felt very, when I was reading it, to me like watching an episode of Black Mirror or the Twilight Zone that had a lot more room to play with and give you a lot more information and backstory. So yeah, it came through me through an odd channel, but I'm really happy that I finally got to read it.
Kat.
I had read Remains of the Day, and I had also read Clara and the Sun, so I was a big fan. I mean, I would put him in my top 10 readers list. But after I read it, I started thinking about some things that maybe I wouldn't have thought about if I hadn't read. He writes about these themes a lot. It is dystopian, but it's dystopian in the way that Handmaid's Tale is dystopian, and maybe it's not going to be dystopian forever. So that's frightening. And it brought up a couple of things that I know that we know historically, but we don't talk about this in daily conversation. One of the things that it brought up for me was the 3/5 compromise for the purpose of taxation and representation. But this is really a question of whether or not you're a human being. And so I can't believe we're having these conversations today as if there's any conversation to be had, But I think that people like Ishiguro are putting these things back out there for conversation again. I think when you write these kinds of things and you have big feels after a book like this. And so you kind of start running through your head about whether this could actually happen, or maybe is it happening? And it's scary, actually. So my first feeling was sadness. My second feeling was scare and fear. And then after that, I thought, thank God someone's talking about this.
And it's interesting that you mentioned scary, because one of the things that I read about this book was that it is a horror story because the narrator does not treat it as though it's horrific.
Yeah.
It's just the way it is. And that acceptance makes it horrifying. So Brandon, what do you think made Never Let Me Go polarizing to the point of being banned?
I mean, we're dealing with big topics here. We're talking about cloning, organ donation. It's like dehumanization of like a certain group of people. It's very upsetting, but it's not more upsetting than the Hunger Games. And it's not even written for children. And it is not, to me, more upsetting. Those topics somehow are not more upsetting than like what they are allowing children to read and they are putting in schools. So I think what it ended up getting, what was polarizing for people, because I've lived in Florida and I know what makes them clutch their pearls, was just like the brief sexual content. Like there is just barely enough sexuality for them to be like, oh, but it was enough probably for them to be like, nope, not for, not for my kids. They can't know that, sex exists. And, I just feel like that was probably like the clincher for them, even though we're dealing with like these very big topics. And I do think it still has to do with like, oh, this may make them empathetic and we are not okay with that. I do think it probably, just knowing Florida and having gone to through the public school system there, that they just saw like that word, they just saw sex or like, anything. And they were like, no, pitch it, burn it.
What about you, Wendy?
I think, okay, so I have two answers. One is a little bit more provocative than the other. The less provocative one is the idea that, it's a little graphic. There's a lot of sex in it, as Brennan was saying. Sex is just treated more as it's out of marriage because they can't have kids, and so that's one idea. The other one is it's kind of a statement about conformity and a statement about blind rule following and giving all to authority, and basically saying, like, you are sheeps to the slaughter. If you don't question this, if you don't fight back, you are sheeps to the slaughter. And this is basically a story about, sacrificial lambs, essentially, from their point of view, as much as the movie Hereditary is also the same way. It's the intricate life, it's the intricacies of the relationships of people who are ultimately going to not be in control of their own fate. And it was predetermined. Also, the idea that, they don't have souls, that cloning, they have souls or don't they have souls, is I think is uncomfortable for people of a religious, of a strict religious observance. So I'm not sure, it's very frequently challenged. It was challenged in Florida, it was challenged in Texas, and the specificities of why that is challenged, I'm not surprised it was challenged, but I have a feeling I would be surprised about the specific things that they cited, because how do you explain, well, we want our children to be docile and just obey us, so we don't want them to learn about not doing that? You can't say that part out loud. So what do you grasp onto? Organ donation, that's what you grasp onto.
Kat.
I think that the reason given is that it was sexually explicit, and I don't think that's the real reason. I think that the real reason is that they don't want to have uncomfortable conversations about slavery. I think they don't want to have young people thinking that it's okay to challenge authority. I think that these are a group of people who just want to be in control. And I think that the whole idea that these children, if you will, or they were children at the beginning, don't have souls. Well, I mean, if you can believe in slavery, well, then you want to believe that a whole group of people don't have souls, and you don't have to worry about that. Then also the sexual content in this book is so minor that I think that you would find more titillation in whatever the kids are reading recreationally than this. And if you were to talk about the sex, it's just kind of why is it okay? Well, it's okay because your dog might get out and do something. Nobody cares because they're not really human anyway. They're not going to have children. They're not going to have a life. And it's almost a consolation prize for them. So, okay, go ahead, do that because we don't care. You're not really human anyway. So, and it's even frowned upon, but it's like, well, we know you do it, just don't make a big deal. So if a kid wants to pick this book up for titillation, this is not the book for you. You've probably seen more on the internet.
Definitely see more on the internet. And, you are all right about this. Like, it really is. It was Florida that banned it. It was challenged a lot in Texas, but it was Florida that actually banned it. And it was for being sexually explicit, which it isn't. It's just sex is mentioned, sex happens, but we don't even dwell on it. It's definitely not interesting sex. It's just that it existed, like it happened. And I think there is something to say about that just being the scapegoat reason that this was thrown in on that ban, because really you were grasping at things if that is your reason. I feel like Wendy has very much touched on something, and then Kat, that was very interesting perspective. So I'm not even going to share the reasons that they say because of how silly they are. And I want to get to, I want to know, what do you think are the reasons that people should read this book? Because this book, to me, is beautifully written. It is not about sex. It is about all the things we've been discussing. But I want to know, if you were put in a room where people were trying to ban this book, like let's say you were on a board and or a town hall or something, and that you're asked to argue in favor of why this book should be available to the public. What are the reasons that people should read Never Let Me Go? What are the conversations it can start? Wendy.
I think, I mean, there's I just had a brain reboot as everything rushed to my brain. Superior storytelling, amazing sentence level work, the craft of literature alone. But I mean, there's just a question of, like, why should a Rembrandt painting be honored, or why should a Mozart symphony be enjoyed? It is a work of art. That said, also from a topical perspective, it helps you understand and recognize the signs of your autonomy being taken away bit by bit, and understand what is the nature of love, both romantic, platonic, and the idea of what do you owe to a society? What, if anything, do you owe to a society? It helps you understand that. Kathy very much submits to her fate and never questions it. She just kind of understands, even though the song that is, she imagines that the song is Never Let Me Go is the idea of a mom to her child. And Kathy, of course, is never going to have children. That's why, was it Madam that was crying? Seeing her do that, because she knew that, they would never have reproductive freedom. So those are the kinds of things that those issues help the reader come to understanding and a decision for themselves, and determine who they're going to be in this world, which is everything.
Brandon.
Yeah, I mean, reading this book is not going to do anything good for anyone's existential dread, but it's beautiful. And we move so fast now, like our technology moves so quickly. So I think that even though it's fiction, we deal with some very real technological advancements that do challenge what it means to be human, what it means to have a soul. All these sort of things that we want to believe are abstract, and yet we are working with, a lot of us are working with AI every single day of our lives right now. So it's like, we are going to have that conversation at some point, and it's not, I just don't think it's completely impossible for the subject matter of the book to come true. I think it's like entirely possible and terrifying. And so we need to read things like this while they're fiction, to consider the moral consequences, because we've done this with AI and we've considered the moral consequences, and yet we are barreling straight through. So because of what I've read involving technology, if nothing else, it's going to make me consistently polite to AI. So I feel like that's the reason we need to read it now, is while it's still fiction, we need to kind of get our thoughts in order and decide what kind of people we want to be when this actually becomes a real question.
Pat.
I think that the two of you, Wendy and Brandon, have stated it better than I possibly can. But I will add this, that if we're going to marginalize people, if we're going to start controlling society, I suppose if I was to explain my reason for why you should read this book, the best thing I could say is what Wendy said, is that it's a work of art. But if you want to look at how to write literature, this is it. I mean, it is absolutely beautiful writing. But my real reason for wanting you to read it is because I really want to slip past your defenses. I would like you to feel what it would be like to be those people. Because if you're going to marginalize whole sections of society because of who they love, or because of what their color of their skin is, or because of, all the myriad reasons why, what if they're male or female, I would really like you to have experienced that. And the only way for you to experience that is through reading, because you can't be those people. But what you can do is books, conservative people sometimes think books are dangerous, and I suppose they are for conservative thinking, because what happens is you're there. You have gone into a new world, someplace you have never visited, and you have had experiences you cannot have in your life. I would like to see your children reading books that take them out of their own little small community and make them look at a larger existence in the world, and to their neighbors, and maybe not the people that live in their direct neighborhood. And that's what books do. So they have, I guess, reason to be afraid of it. I would never tell them my real reason. I just said it here, but I don't imagine that the people that I'm talking to don't think the way I do.
Well, thank you all for your input. This has been a brilliant conversation. You were all wonderful. Before we wrap up, Brandon, where can people find you and support your work?
You can follow me on Instagram at Fierce Storytelling. There's way too many Brandon Meads in the world. So you can also find me fiercestorytelling.com. And if you want something spicier, you can look for my erotica. That's written under Leo Sparks with an X, S-P-A.
Don't you have a few recent publications that you might want to share?
Oh gosh, yes. Instant Noodles is putting out The Devil's Party today. I have a piece in that about sitting in a coffee shop with the devil. T-Art Press put out The Summit, which is about a conversion camp on the top of a mountain. Yeah, I've had a good year, so I don't know. It's all on my website. Please
Okay.
read, and hopefully I'll have like a book to pitch by the end of the year.
How about you, Kat?
A lot of my work is nonfiction, but my fiction can be found at kjfieler.com. There's some there, and there's more to come.
And your podcast?
Oh yeah, and writer to writer, the number, not the word. If you look it up on YouTube, look for Kat Fieler, and you'll find it that way.
And Wendy?
My book, Entry Level Short Stories, is available everywhere you can buy good fine fiction, but especially at your independent bookstore. They can get it for you in a flash, and you'll feel good about it. And you can connect with me on Threads and Blue Sky and Instagram and Facebook at wendywimmer.com as well. So Wendy like the hamburger place, and Wimmer like winner, but with M's instead of N's.
Thank you again, everyone. That's it for today's conversation. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, comment, and share. Thank you for listening. And more importantly, thank you for reading.